Mr. Chairman. The answer is yes. We established, and when I say we, I mean that the legislature established the State Board for Charter Schools. It was specifically intended to oversee charter schools as a government entity. So the State Board for Charter Schools is the sponsoring entity for probably 99% or more of the charter schools. They have, over the last 20 years, have developed a framework that is regulatory, from annual audits to procurement rules, everything you can think of. That is their job, and they do it on a regular basis. They meet monthly. They discuss all of these things. They establish the financial issues that we were talking about, the financial framework. We've given them the ability to withhold 10% of funding if charter schools are out of compliance. The answer is yes. All of that applies in addition to Title X, which applies to charter schools because, again, they are private companies. So as private companies, Title X is going to apply when it comes to fiduciary, when it comes to conflicts of interest. All of those things apply. And then charter schools have to deal with generally accepted accounting principles, either USFR or generally accepted accounting principles. If charter schools, and that's what the issue is there when it says the exempt charter schools, is that they, through contract, have gained an exemption from some of these, the USFRs, but then there is a different reporting, which is generally accepted accounting principles. So they will operate daily under GAAP, but then the State Board for Charter Schools requires that they do a bridge into USFR for reporting purposes. All of that's covered. So everything that's in here already is going to be covered in the State Board for Charter Schools, in Title X, or the provisions that are going to be required under GAAP for good practices. All of that already applies.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Farnsworth, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do want to verify, is there a requirement that a charter school ensure the maximum practicable competition in the procurement of any materials, services, goods, construction, or construction services?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Engel, the answer is no, because for a private company, that's a ridiculous standard. The standard actually is going to be based upon what is practicable in the circumstance. So in certain times, for example, the state doesn't come in and build buildings for charter schools. They have to deal through the bonds or through the private sector, and so it depends on who's going to give them a loan. It may not be the cheapest loan, but it may be the one that's going to give them the most money with the least amount down. So when you're talking about a government entity like government schools, district schools, and they have very specific processes to control that government money that doesn't transmute to private, then those very restrictive or very secure types of processes make sense. With private entities, private companies, that's not what the government should be doing. The responsibility in fiduciary lies under Title X. So charter schools are still going to have to follow those fiduciary responsibilities, and they're still going to have to go out to bid. They still have to look after the best interest of the corporation, but it may be timing. For example, district schools, if they have it paid by the SFB, there's an entire timeline established, and that can be tracked and monitored. In the private sector, that's not necessarily the case. Going to a bond issuance takes time. There may be hiccups. They may require that there be additional information. So there may be an additional cost to try to do that and get the product. It may be that you have somebody who has a higher quality but isn't necessarily the cheapest. So no, that standard that you have in there is exceptionally restrictive, and it doesn't work in the private sector.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Farnsworth, I think you've answered my question. We are not treating all schools, charter schools and district schools the same, and I'm having trouble understanding that charter schools, which are privately owned, wouldn't be subject to this standard of maximum practicable competition, as you would think they would have the nimbleness to be able to comply with something like that more than a school that is run by a government entity. But in any case, let me ask you another question. with respect to the requirement that there is proof that the construction or construction services has been awarded to someone who has a valid license to practice in the state. So that requirement has also, we've taken out the language for charter schools. I understand from Speaker Mesnard that's because it doesn't make sense for the state board, but do we have a parallel requirement for charter schools?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Engel, no. Again, it doesn't make sense. You have to get out of this bureaucratic mentality of thinking that charter schools are government entities. They are not. When charter schools go out and they bid in the private sector, they have the personal interest and the interest of their organization to watch after. But it has nothing to do with the state. The state isn't guaranteeing the loans. The state isn't on the hook for the loans. The mortgage or the deed of trust that exists is held by the individual organization or the individual charter holder. They're the ones that are on the hook. If that's not paid, guess what? The state doesn't have to go in and pay for that building, which is different than if they're paying for a government-owned building. So they are two completely different standards. And earlier, when you made your comment before this question, you said, so it sounds like the charter schools and district schools are not being treated the same. That's right. Nobody's hiding that. That's exactly why charter schools were created, was to try to create a competitive or a private sector contractual solution to this. We are not. Charter schools are not the same. But specifically to this question, the buildings have nothing to do with the state. The state is not on the hook for them. They don't hold the deed of trust. They have no obligation. And if a charter school operator defaults on it, the state doesn't have to pay a penny.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Farnsworth, I appreciate that explanation. I do have a question for you. Does the state pay a charter school a per pupil amount of money?
Members,
out of state
keep the noise down a little
funds, just like we do to our district schools? Is that not the case?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Engel, the answer is yes. Just like we pay the DD providers out of state funds, just like we provide the access providers out of state funds, just like we pay the private construction companies like Core Construction that builds a lot of schools and gets paid from public money, we pay them. We pay charter schools out of public money. You get paid out of public money. We continue to get caught up in this idea that if you get paid out of public money, that somehow everything you do is transparent and it's always government money and they have a right to know everything that you're doing. We don't treat anybody else like that anywhere except for charter schools. We don't. You don't have to disclose where you're spending your $24,000 a year. Core Construction doesn't have to disclose where they're spending their money. The question is, did you perform? So there are two issues that have to exist when you're talking about contracting with a private entity. Number one is, have we overpaid? And number two, have you performed? And if you have performed and we have not overpaid, then the state really has no say in what goes on. The performance is educating in the cases for charter schools. So are charter schools educating? They either are or they aren't. And that's where the State Board of Charter Schools pays attention to them. We have the A through F system. We have the growth system, et cetera. As long as we're performing. Now, it's broader than that because we are subject to health and safety regulations. We have annual audits. And so that performance measure is reasonable. And that's exactly what charter schools should be giving, is the performance measure. Not all the inputs, not all of how they pay their employees. The charter school employees are not government employees. So, yes, charter schools are paid out of public money, but it transmutes into private money when they receive it, just like when you receive your paycheck, it transmutes to private money, just like Core Construction when they get it, just like the DD providers, just like the doctors with access. All of those people get public money, but when they receive it, it becomes private money. It goes the other direction when you pay your taxes. If you go in and you buy groceries and you pay a sales tax, that private money now just became public money.